What they like to talk about is the politics of the vote. What does this mean in November? What's it going to mean for Obama? Will his presidency be crippled? Or will he be, or will he be the comeback kid? It's just like Sports Center. It's considered a sport. And who's up and who's down, and everybody's keeping score, and you got the teams going at it. It's rock'em sock'em robots.
Joining me now, David Plouffe, President Obama's campaign manager, who the president brought back just a few months ago to plan strategy for Democrats heading into the midterms. He's also the author of Audacity to Win. And in Indianapolis, Karl Rove, the architect of President Bush's successful campaigns for president, and the author, we have your book as well, Karl, Courage and Consequences. So, David, listening to some of the analysis today, you would think we are either in the last 6 hours of the Obama presidency as we know it, or the beginning of the great Obama comeback. What are the stakes here today?
Well, first of all, we ought to focus on not the political stakes, but the stakes for the country. And we are not going to succeed as a country economically if we don't do the right kind of health care reform. And we're on the verge of passing something here that's going to help grow jobs, help save families and businesses money, going to end the donut hole that seniors have to pay for prescriptions. But I think the politics of this, by the way, we passed this, we're in much better shape politically as a Democratic Party than we are today. Because we're going to go out there and not just talk about what we're for, but what the Republicans are voting against. They are siding with the insurance companies over people who have been denied coverage for pre-existing conditions, siding with the insurance companies over saving seniors money. So this isn't just about us being a piñata here in the election. Elections are about choices. They are voting against an enormous tax cut for health care for 40 million middle-class families and 4 million small businesses. That's what they're opposing here.
Just quickly on the politics, if you lose this vote, do you lose the House?
Oh, listen, we're 30 weeks away. I think I've been very clear about this. We are going to be much better positioned politically. Now, that's secondary to what's right for the country if we pass this. By the way, we had 15 million new voters vote in the 2008 election, okay? These were people who were cynical that their vote really mattered. If we don't pass health care, I think that sends a very depressing message. But it's going to be a very powerful message to them that their vote mattered and they ought to stay involved in politics, and it can make a big difference in this country.
Now, Karl, the president spoke about you when he went to talk to the Democrats yesterday. This is what he had to say.
I noticed that there's been a lot of friendly advice offered all across town. Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, Karl Rove. Now, it could be that they are suddenly having a change of heart, and they are deeply concerned about their Democratic friends.
Now, Karl, do you seriously believe that Democrats are better off if this does not pass?
Look, I think the country is better off if this thing doesn't pass. This thing is $2.4 trillion for the first 10 years of its operation. This thing has 10 years worth of tax increases, $569 billion in tax increases, including $210 billion in a new payroll tax and a new 3.8% surtax on investments that's going to make us less competitive, $500 billion plus of Medicare cuts to pay for, in essence, 4 complete years of the operation of this program. The subsidies don't begin until year 4 and are not fully operational until year 10. If you look at the first 10 years of the operation of this thing, it is $2.4 trillion, and this thing is paid for by Bernie Madoff-style accounting, in which they double count money and ignore enormous costs. They claim $138 billion of deficit reduction, but it's either between $480 billion in deficits added to the red ink. If you just look at what they double count, and it's $720 billion if you count what they ignore in here. These people are double counting $53 billion worth of Social Security revenue twice. Once for Social Security and once to pay for this program. $70 billion from a new long-term care premium. They count it for the premium program and then for paying for this program. They count $500 billion worth of Medicare cuts twice. They'd ignore $208 billion in Medicare doc fixes that they just put off to the side and said, we'll pay for that later, and $30 billion in Medicaid doc fixes. This thing is not $138 billion in the black. It is either $480 billion if you look at what they double count, or $720 billion in deficit in the first 10 years if you take what they ignore.
So, David,
this thing is a gigantic disaster.
Bernie Madoff accounting, a gigantic disaster?
Well, you know, listen, Karl and the Republicans would be familiar with that, since under their leadership, they took us from big budget surpluses at the beginning of the last decade to a $1.3 $3 trillion deficit by not paying for things like the prescription drug plan, 2 wars, big tax cuts. So no, this is the Congressional Budget Office is very clear. Over the next 2 decades, this is going to cut the deficit by over $1 trillion. Over $1 trillion.
It only cuts the deficit. It only cuts the deficit if you double count, as you double count $53 billion worth of Social Security payroll taxes twice. If you double count $500 billion in Medicare cuts twice, once for reducing the cost of the $38 trillion unfunded liability in Medicare, and at the same time for the current expenditures of this program. And if you double count $72 trillion in premium payments for a new long-term care entitlement program twice, once for the premium payments for the program and once for this. Look, you have run up more deficit before this bill in the first 20 months and 11 days of your term in office than was done in the entire Bush years. Your plan is to take the deficits, which were 2% under George W. Bush, to 5.1% over the next 10 years under Barack Obama. Don't be lecturing us about what you're doing with the profligate spending that started last year with the failed stimulus bill and continued with your budget increases. You have just increased the discretionary domestic spending budget of the United States 25% starting in the middle of the last fiscal year. This is $2.4 trillion in cost for its first 10 years, and the country cannot afford it, and you will bankrupt the country if this bill passes.
I think Karl's against this bill, but isn't there a point, though? I mean, there is some interesting accounting here. I mean, the Medicare doc fix, for instance, is not in here. That's a couple $100 billion. I mean, isn't it hard as a political factor for people to believe that a big new health care program is actually going to cut the deficit?
Well, first of all, Karl, the Republicans have zero credibility, about as much credibility as the country of Greece does, to talk about fiscal responsibility.
This is the CBO.
Karl,
these numbers are in the analysis from the CBO. For God's sake, will you stop throwing around epithets and deal with the facts for once, David?
Karl.
What about double counting 53, 70, and 500? What about leaving out $208 billion for Medicare doc fix? What about leaving out $30 billion for the Medicaid doc fix? You've got 2 years worth of a Medicaid doc fix. Are you telling me that in 2 years you're going to cut overnight the doc reimbursement and not pay it for the balance of the 8 years of this program? Deal with the facts, David. Stop throwing around labels.
Let's put the fanciful chart away, okay? This is the CBO.
It is not a fanciful chart. Deal with the charts.
Karl,
deal with these facts, David. What about double counting? What are you doing about that double counting?
Let's give him a chance to answer.
I'm trying to. The CBO, major economists who've looked at this health care reform, very clear that this in this decade is going to lower the deficit, and then in the next decade, over $1 trillion. What the American people are focused on, what we need to be focused on, are the health care costs, premiums skyrocketing. We saw recently health insurers threatening to raise insurance rates 30, 40% on individuals, small businesses being bankrupted, not be able to provide care. It's obviously devastating our federal budget situation. We are not going to solve these problems unless we have meaningful health insurance reform, and that's what we're going to do. And listen, the Republican Party, if they want to run in this election and the elections of this next decade, against reducing the deficit by over $1 trillion, against the insurance company reforms, against saving money, we're happy to have that debate.
Within 2 months, the Democrat Congress is going to be forced to deal with the doc fix. They're going to bring up a Medicare doc fix that's going to be $208 billion, according to a CBO analysis of it issued 2 days ago. We will see very soon how much they're committed to fiscal discipline when they pass a doc fix without an offset that adds $208 billion to the deficit. And when we start to see them continue to double count, I like it that David never dealt with the issue of double counting and never dealt with these other issues. We will see if they pass this bill. I hope they don't. I pray they don't. It will be an economic disaster for the country if they do.